Over 100 gunshots shattered the night air at 5 Point South, Birmingham. Bodies dropped to the pavement. Blood pooled on the streets. 4 dead. 17 wounded. The date, September 21, 2024. Police would soon identify their primary suspect, Damien Laron McDaniel III, just 22 years old. But this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a man who snapped in a moment of rage. This was, authorities allege, the 18th murder connected to McDaniel in a 14-month rampage across Birmingham. A spree that included firefighters shot at their station, a pregnant woman and her boyfriend executed on Valentine's Day, and multiple mass shootings that left communities paralyzed with fear. He expressed he would feel no empathy for the mother of someone who had been killed, one investigator noted after interviewing McDaniel. This cold detachment would become his signature. The most disturbing part? McDaniel should never have been free to commit these crimes. At 17, he had already opened fire at his high school. Yet somehow, he received a plea deal that put him back on the streets within 2 years. What happens in a person's mind to enable such violence? What critical failures in our system allowed this teenager to allegedly evolve into one of Alabama's most prolific killers? And why didn't anyone stop him when the warning signs were flashing like emergency beacons? Tonight, we'll trace McDaniel's path from troubled teen to accused mass murderer. We'll examine the psychological factors, the missed opportunities for intervention, and the devastating consequences of those failures. The case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. How do we identify those truly capable of extreme violence? What responsibility do we bear when systems designed to protect us collapse so completely? And could this happen again? Have you ever noticed behaviors in someone that genuinely concerned you? What were those warning signs? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective might help others recognize dangerous patterns before tragedy strikes. Welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our investigations into America's most disturbing cases. If you're returning, thank you for your support. Like this video and share it with anyone interested in understanding the psychology behind violent crime. This is the story of Damien McDaniel III, and it's one every community needs to hear. Damien Laron McDaniel III entered the world on July 6, 2002, in Fairfield, Alabama, a community struggling with poverty, crime, and limited opportunities. From his earliest days, the shadow of the criminal justice system loomed over his family life. His father, Damien McDaniel Sr., was serving a federal sentence for drug-related offenses, immediately placing young Damien in a statistic that would follow him: a child with an incarcerated parent. While public records provide limited detail about specific childhood traumas McDaniel experienced, research consistently shows that children with incarcerated parents face significantly higher risks. They often experience economic hardship, housing instability, and disrupted attachment, all factors that can profoundly impact psychological development. School records indicate McDaniel displayed concerning behavior during his teenage years. Disciplinary issues became increasingly common, though specific details remain protected by privacy laws. What is clear is that his interactions with authority figures were frequently confrontational, suggesting difficulty with emotional regulation and impulse control. By his mid-teens, McDaniel had already had several encounters with law enforcement, though the nature of these early interactions hasn't been fully disclosed. This pattern of escalating behavioral problems culminated in the most significant red flag: the October 2019 shooting at Fairfield High School when McDaniel was just 17 years old. The school shooting represented a dramatic escalation in violence. While no one was killed in this incident, the willingness to bring a firearm into a school environment and discharge it demonstrated a profound disregard for human life and safety. It also revealed a young man whose response to conflict had evolved to include potentially lethal violence. The psychological factors that contribute to school shootings are complex and multifaceted. Research indicates that most school shooters experience a combination of social rejection, access to firearms, exposure to violence, and inadequate mental health support. For McDaniel, growing up with a father in prison likely contributed to feelings of abandonment and anger that, without proper intervention, festered into violence. By the time McDaniel brought a gun to Fairfield High School in 2019, he had already traveled far down a path toward violence. The school shooting wasn't a sudden break from character, but rather the culmination of years of environmental factors, inadequate intervention, and psychological development in the shadow of the criminal justice system. What makes McDaniel's case particularly tragic is that this school shooting, an act that should have triggered intensive intervention, instead became merely the first chapter in what authorities allege would become a much longer and bloodier story. The warning signs were clear. The red flags were waving. Yet somehow, the systems designed to protect both McDaniel and the community failed to respond adequately to this glaring signal of danger. The October 2019 shooting at Fairfield High School marked McDaniel's first documented violent crime. At just 17 years old, he brought a firearm onto school grounds and opened fire. While public records don't detail his specific motivations or targets, the incident resulted in 2 attempted murder charges. Fortunately, no lives were lost, but the potential for mass casualties was clear. What happened next reveals the first major breakdown in the system. Despite the severity of bringing a gun to school and firing it, an act that could have resulted in multiple deaths, the case moved slowly through Alabama's courts. For nearly 3.5 years, McDaniel's case remained in legal limbo while he awaited trial or a plea agreement. In April 2023, at age 20, McDaniel finally entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of attempted murder for the school shooting. The sentence handed down was 15 years, a term that, on paper, might seem substantial. However, the critical detail was in the fine print. McDaniel would only be required to serve a minimum of 2 years behind bars before becoming eligible for probation. This sentencing decision represents a pivotal moment where the justice system had an opportunity to intervene decisively in the life of a young man who had already demonstrated a willingness to use deadly force. Instead, the plea agreement created a revolving door that would soon allow McDaniel back onto the streets. When we see violent offenses involving firearms, particularly in school settings, these should be treated as major red flags, explains former prosecutor Sarah Jenkins. The decision to offer a plea with minimal incarceration time for a school shooting sends a dangerous message and puts communities at risk. After serving the minimum required time, McDaniel was released on probation. The conditions of his release included standard restrictions for violent offenders: no possession of firearms, no association with known criminals, and regular check-ins with probation officers. Almost immediately, McDaniel began violating these conditions. His social media accounts became showcases for exactly the behavior his probation terms prohibited. He posted videos featuring firearms, the very weapons he was legally barred from possessing. He openly associated with convicted criminals, documenting these interactions online for anyone to see, including his probation officers. These violations weren't subtle or hidden. They were broadcast publicly, suggesting either a profound disregard for the consequences or a belief that those consequences would never materialize. Either way, they represented clear warning signs that McDaniel remained a threat to public safety. Yet despite these flagrant violations, McDaniel remained free. The probation monitoring system, designed to catch precisely this type of behavior, failed to respond effectively. Each post featuring a firearm, each documented interaction with other criminals, represented a missed opportunity to remove a dangerous individual from the community before tragedy struck. Do you think the justice system failed by allowing McDaniel back into society so quickly? What would you have done differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This case highlights critical failures in how our system handles high-risk offenders. First, the plea agreement itself prioritized processing efficiency over public safety, offering minimal incarceration for a serious violent offense. Second, the probation monitoring system lacked the resources or will to enforce the conditions it had set. Third, there appears to have been little coordination between law enforcement agencies regarding McDaniel's escalating risk factors. By mid-2023, McDaniel had transformed from a school shooter to what authorities would later describe as one of Alabama's most prolific alleged killers. This evolution wasn't gradual, it was explosive. Within just 14 months, law enforcement would connect him to 18 murders across Birmingham, revealing a pattern of escalating violence that shocked even veteran investigators. The timeline of McDaniel's alleged crimes shows a rapid acceleration in both frequency and severity. His first post-release homicide occurred on July 12, 2023, when firefighter Jordan Melton was shot at Birmingham Fire Station 9 during a shift change. Another firefighter, Jamal Jones, was injured in the same attack. This wasn't a random act. Melton had been subpoenaed in an unrelated murder trial, suggesting the shooting may have been intended to silence a witness. This initial homicide revealed several aspects of McDaniel's emerging methodology: targeted victims, public locations, and a willingness to shoot multiple people to accomplish his objective. It also demonstrated a complete disregard for the consequences of his actions, as attacking first responders at their station represented an extraordinary level of boldness. Perhaps the most disturbing insight into McDaniel's psychological makeup came from his own words. In a documentary interview, McDaniel stated he would feel no empathy for the mother of someone who had been killed. This chilling declaration aligns with what psychologists identify as a hallmark of antisocial personality patterns: the inability to feel remorse or empathy for others' suffering. When someone expresses a complete absence of empathy, particularly regarding the grief of a mother who's lost a child, we're seeing a profound emotional disconnect, explains forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Reynolds. This isn't simply callousness. It's an indication that the person doesn't process emotional pain the way most humans do. This emotional void removes a critical barrier that prevents most people from committing violence. The diversity in McDaniel's alleged crimes, from the calculated killing of a potential witness to indiscriminate mass shootings, suggests an offender who adapted his methods based on opportunity and objective. When a specific target was required, he allegedly conducted targeted assassinations. When maximum impact was the goal, he allegedly opened fire in crowded venues. This tactical flexibility made him particularly dangerous and difficult to predict. By September 2024, McDaniel had allegedly evolved from a school shooter who fortunately killed no one to a suspect in 18 homicides across Birmingham. This rapid transformation represents one of the most accelerated criminal evolutions documented in recent American crime history. The absence of effective intervention during this period, despite clear warning signs and probation violations, allowed this evolution to continue unchecked until his October 2024 arrest. Behind every statistic in Damien McDaniel's alleged crime spree were real people whose lives ended in violence. The chronology of these killings reveals not just who died, but how these crimes unfolded, painting a disturbing picture of escalating brutality across Birmingham. The first known killing occurred on July 12, 2023, at Birmingham Fire Station 9. It was shift change, a routine moment in firefighters' daily lives. Jordan Melton had just arrived for duty when gunfire erupted without warning. Surveillance footage later showed a vehicle pulling up outside the station. The shooter exited, approached the building, and opened fire through windows and doors, specifically targeting the firefighters inside. Melton was struck multiple times in the torso. His colleague Jamal Jones was hit in the arm and shoulder, but managed to take cover. First responders, Melton's own colleagues, rushed to save him, but he died from his wounds at UAB hospital hours later. Investigators later discovered Melton had been subpoenaed in an unrelated murder trial, suggesting a motive to silence a potential witness. 6 months passed before the next known killing. On January 10, 2024, neighbors heard gunshots in the early evening on Mia Nixon's residential street. When they looked outside, they saw the 21-year-old collapsed in her driveway next to her car, keys still in her hand. She had been shot multiple times at close range in what appeared to be an ambush-style killing. Security cameras from a nearby home captured a figure waiting in shadows for nearly 30 minutes before Nixon arrived home. The killer approached her as she exited her vehicle, fired multiple shots, and fled on foot through a neighbor's yard. Nixon died at the scene before paramedics could arrive. February 2024 brought one of the most calculated killings in the spree. Christian Norris, 21, and his pregnant girlfriend Angeliah Webster were last seen alive on Valentine's Day, leaving a restaurant after a celebration dinner. When they didn't return home, family members reported them missing. 3 days later, a maintenance worker at an apartment complex noticed a parked car with condensation on the windows. Inside, he discovered the couple's bodies. Both had been shot execution style in the back of the head. Webster, 5 months pregnant, had her hands placed protectively over her stomach, a final, futile attempt to shield her unborn child. Investigators determined they had likely been forced to drive to the location at gunpoint before being killed. Their credit cards had been used at several locations after their deaths, creating a trail that would later help identify suspects. On April 9, 2024, Anthony Love Jr., a 44-year-old UPS worker, was walking to his car after his shift when a vehicle pulled alongside him in the employee parking lot. According to witnesses, someone called his name, causing him to turn toward the vehicle. Multiple shots were fired, striking Love in the chest and head. The vehicle, later identified as a stolen Dodge Charger, sped away as co-workers rushed to help. Love died at the scene, still wearing his UPS uniform. Prosecutors would later characterize this as a murder for hire, citing evidence that McDaniel had received payment through a Cash App just hours before the killing. The precision of the attack suggested prior surveillance of Love's routine and workplace. The violence escalated dramatically on July 13, 2024, at Trendsetters Lounge. What began as a typical Saturday night at the crowded Birmingham nightclub turned to chaos at 1:17 a.m. when multiple shooters entered and opened fire without warning. Security footage showed 3 men, faces partially covered, pushing through the entrance and immediately discharging weapons into the packed dance floor. 4 people were killed in the initial barrage. 2 died on the dance floor, 1 at the bar, and another near the restrooms. Dozens more were injured in the stampede to escape. Shell casings littered the floor, over 60 in total, indicating modified weapons with extended magazines. Witnesses described people trampling each other to reach exits, hiding under tables, and using fallen friends as shields. First responders described the scene as a war zone, with blood covering the floors and walls. On August 13, 2024, during an unrelated police chase, 61-year-old Charlie Herbert Moore became a victim when suspects broke into his apartment seeking a hiding place. Moore, who had been watching television in his living room, was shot multiple times when he confronted the intruders. Neighbors reported hearing him plead for his life before multiple gunshots rang out. Police, who had been in pursuit of suspect from another crime, arrived to find Moore's door kicked in and his body on the living room floor. He had been shot 7 times at close range. Nothing was stolen from the apartment, suggesting the killing was solely to eliminate a witness. September 19, 2024, brought another nightclub shooting when Deontra Brown, 35, was hit by gunfire inside a lounge. Unlike previous attacks, this shooting appeared less organized. Witnesses described an argument that escalated when someone pulled a gun and began firing wildly. Brown, who had been sitting at a table across the room and wasn't involved in the dispute, was struck by a stray bullet that hit her in the neck. Security camera footage showed her slumping forward onto her table as chaos erupted around her. Friends tried to apply pressure to her wound, but she died before emergency services could arrive. Authorities later indicated she was not the intended target, but rather collateral damage in what may have been a gang-related dispute. The violence reached its horrific peak on September 21, 2024, at 5 Point South, a popular entertainment district. At approximately 11:30 p.m., multiple vehicles pulled up along the crowded street. Witnesses described seeing men with what appeared to be machine guns emerge and open fire indiscriminately into the Saturday night crowds. Over 100 shots were fired in less than 2 minutes, creating a scene of unprecedented carnage. 4 people died where they fell on the sidewalks and street. 17 others suffered gunshot wounds of varying severity. Surveillance footage from multiple businesses captured the coordinated attack from different angles, showing shooters methodically sweeping the area with gunfire before returning to their vehicles and speeding away. First responders arrived to find victims scattered across a 2-block area, some still trying to crawl to safety. Emergency rooms across Birmingham were overwhelmed with victims, forcing some to be diverted to hospitals in neighboring communities. The day after, on September 22, 2024, retaliatory shootings connected to the 5 Points massacre resulted in additional casualties. In what police described as gang payback, shooters targeted locations believed to be connected to the previous night's attackers. These shootings occurred in residential areas, with bullets striking homes, vehicles, and bystanders. The cycle of violence had expanded beyond its original participants, claiming victims who had no connection to either side of the conflict. Each crime scene told its own story of lives suddenly and violently ended. Each victim left behind grieving families who would never be the same. The brutality and frequency of these killings created a climate of fear across Birmingham, with residents avoiding public spaces and looking over their shoulders, even in their own neighborhoods. As the body count rose, the question on everyone's mind was simple but urgent. When would it end? The Birmingham Police Department faced an extraordinary challenge as homicides mounted across the city throughout 2023 and 2024. Initially, investigators had no reason to connect these seemingly disparate crimes. A firefighter shot at his station, a young woman killed in her driveway, a couple murdered on Valentine's Day. Each case was assigned to different detectives, each working with limited resources in a city already struggling with violent crime. The first breakthrough came through ballistics evidence. Firearms leave distinctive markings on bullets and shell casings, unique signatures that can link crimes across time and location. As forensic technicians processed evidence from multiple homicides, patterns began to emerge. The same weapons were appearing at different crime scenes, suggesting either the same perpetrator or a shared source of firearms. Ballistics was the first thread that allowed us to start connecting these cases, explained Birmingham Police Chief Scott Thurmond in a press conference after McDaniel's arrest. When you have the same gun showing up at multiple homicide scenes across months, that's not coincidence. That's a pattern. As detectives began comparing notes across cases, they discovered another critical source of evidence: McDaniel's own social media accounts. Despite being on probation for the school shooting, with explicit conditions prohibiting firearm possession, McDaniel regularly posted videos and photos displaying weapons. These weren't just any weapons. Forensic analysis would later suggest some matched those used in the homicides. These social media posts provided investigators with a timeline of McDaniel's movements and associations. They documented his connections to known criminals and showed him in possession of modified weapons capable of the rapid fire witnessed at several crime scenes. What had been intended as bragging became a digital trail of evidence. Witness testimony proved more difficult to secure. In communities where gun violence is common, the no-snitching code often prevails, a silence born from both distrust of police and fear of retaliation. However, as the violence escalated to mass shootings, more witnesses came forward. The 5 Points South shooting, with its high victim count and public location, generated dozens of witness statements that helped investigators piece together what happened. After 5 Points, people were angry enough to talk, noted one detective who requested anonymity due to the ongoing case. When violence reaches that level, when innocent people are gunned down just enjoying a night out, the community's fear turns to outrage. Surveillance footage from businesses near shooting locations provided additional evidence. Cameras captured vehicles arriving and departing crime scenes, individuals matching McDaniel's description, and in some cases, the shootings themselves. This footage, combined with cell phone data placing McDaniel's devices near crime scenes, created a compelling digital map of his alleged movements. The investigation accelerated after the 5 Points South mass shooting in September 2024. With public pressure mounting and evidence accumulating, law enforcement agencies across Jefferson County coordinated their efforts. McDaniel's probation violations, clearly documented on his own social media, provided the simplest path to removing him from the streets, while investigators built more serious cases. In October 2024, authorities located McDaniel at a home in Fairfield, Alabama. He was arrested without incident, initially on probation violations and firearm possession charges. His bond was set at $685,000, an amount that ensured he would remain in custody while prosecutors prepared more serious charges. As McDaniel sat in jail, the evidence against him continued to mount. Ballistics tests linked more shootings to weapons associated with him. Witness statements placed him at or near multiple crime scenes. Digital evidence, including location data from his phone and social media posts, filled in gaps in the timeline. What had begun as separate investigations into individual homicides coalesced into a comprehensive case against a single suspect. The charges escalated rapidly. What began as probation violations soon expanded to include capital murder counts for multiple victims. By May 2025, McDaniel had been formally charged in connection with 18 homicides, making him one of the most prolific alleged killers in Alabama's recent history. Law enforcement officials described the case as unprecedented in its complexity. We're talking about multiple crime scenes across more than a year, different weapons, different apparent motives, and different types of victims, explained District Attorney Danny Carr. Building this case required extraordinary coordination between agencies and investigators who refused to give up. The investigation revealed both the strengths and limitations of modern policing. While forensic science, digital surveillance, and interagency cooperation eventually led to McDaniel's arrest, questions remained about why it took so long to connect the cases and remove him from the streets, especially given his documented probation violations months before his arrest. On January 22, 2025, Damien McDaniel III appeared in a Jefferson County courtroom for his arraignment. The proceedings took place under extraordinary security measures, multiple armed officers, metal detectors, and strict limitations on who could enter the courtroom. McDaniel, now facing the consequences of his alleged 14-month reign of terror, stood before the judge in shackles and a bulletproof vest. The charges against him were read aloud, multiple counts of capital murder, each representing a life cut short. First-degree assault charges for those who survived his alleged attacks. The list took several minutes to complete, a stark accounting of the devastation prosecutors claim he caused across Birmingham. McDaniel entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. His demeanor during the arraignment was described by courtroom observers as emotionless and detached, consistent with a lack of empathy he had previously expressed in interviews. His defense team immediately began filing motions challenging various aspects of the case. They argued that search warrants had been executed improperly, violating McDaniel's constitutional rights. They claimed he had received inadequate counsel during his earlier plea agreement for the school shooting. They requested change of venue, arguing that the extensive publicity surrounding the case made it impossible for McDaniel to receive a fair trial in Jefferson County. The defense is employing a standard strategy in high-profile cases, explained legal analyst Marcus Johnson. When the evidence is overwhelming, you attack the process. You look for procedural errors that might lead to evidence being excluded or, in extreme cases, charges being dismissed. McDaniel himself filed a request for retrial regarding his 2023 guilty plea, claiming his legal decisions had been coerced and his rights violated. This motion appeared designed to undermine the foundation of his probation violations. If the original plea was invalid, the argument went, then the subsequent violations would be called into question. Prosecutors responded by methodically addressing each defense motion. They presented documentation showing search warrants had been properly obtained and executed. They provided evidence that McDaniel had received appropriate legal representation during his earlier case. They argued that, despite media coverage, an impartial jury could still be seated in Jefferson County. The court scheduled McDaniel's first trial for April 2026, focusing initially on the Trendsetters Lounge mass shooting case. This strategic decision by prosecutors aimed to begin with one of the strongest evidence packages while allowing additional time to prepare for subsequent trials. Given the complexity of the case, multiple crime scenes, dozens of witnesses, and extensive forensic evidence, this timeline reflected the enormous preparation required. As these legal maneuvers unfolded, McDaniel remained incarcerated at Kilby Correctional Facility in Alabama. His probation from the 2023 plea agreement was formally revoked in December 2024, ensuring he would remain behind bars regardless of bond considerations for the new charges. The courtroom became a place of intense emotion as victims' families attended hearings, often coming face to face with the man accused of killing their loved ones. Security personnel repeatedly had to intervene when tensions escalated between McDaniel's family and the families of victims. These confrontations highlighted the ripple effects of violence, how a single individual's actions could create lasting divisions and trauma across an entire community. For the families of victims like Jordan Melton, Mia Nixon, Christian Norris, and Angelia Webster, the legal proceedings represented both a path to justice and a painful reopening of wounds. Many expressed frustration at the slow pace of the justice system and the knowledge that final resolution might be years away. "We just want closure," said the mother of one victim during a courthouse press conference. "Every delay, every motion, every continuance means another day we can't begin to heal. But we'll be here every step of the way. We owe that to our children." After learning about this case, do you believe our system is equipped to identify potential mass shooters before they act? Subscribe for more in-depth crime analysis and join the conversation below. 18 lives extinguished. Dozens more forever altered by physical and psychological wounds. Hundreds of family members and friends left to navigate the aftermath of sudden, violent loss. The ripple effects of Damien McDaniel's alleged 14-month crime spree extend far beyond the immediate victims, touching countless lives across Birmingham and beyond. The families of Jordan Melton, Mia Nixon, Christian Norris, Angelia Webster, and her unborn child, Anthony Love Jr., Charlie Herbert Moore, Deontra Brown, and the victims of the Trendsetters Lounge and 5 Points South mass shootings continue their long journey toward justice. Many attend every court hearing, carrying photos of their loved ones, silent testimonies to the human cost of violence. They have formed support networks, finding strength in shared grief and determination to ensure their loved ones aren't forgotten. "We're not just names on a court document," said one victim's father at a community vigil. "Our children were people with dreams, with futures. They mattered. And we won't stop fighting until there's accountability." If convicted of capital murder in Alabama, McDaniel faces 2 possible sentences: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. Prosecutors have not yet announced whether they will seek the death penalty, a decision that will likely consider both the severity of the crimes and the wishes of victims' families. Regardless of the outcome, the legal process will likely continue for years through trials and potential appeals. The McDaniel case forces us to confront difficult questions about preventing similar tragedies. The warning signs were numerous and clear. A school shooting at 17, documented probation violations including firearm possession, and social media posts displaying weapons and violent associations. Yet these red flags didn't trigger interventions that might have saved lives. Effective prevention requires multiple systems working in concert. Mental health resources for early intervention, properly resourced probation departments that can meaningfully supervise high-risk offenders, firearm regulations that prevent those with violent histories from accessing weapons, and communities empowered to report concerning behavior. Understanding the psychology behind violent crime isn't about glorifying perpetrators. It's about recognizing patterns that might help prevent future tragedies. McDaniel's case illustrates how early trauma, exposure to criminality, lack of intervention after initial violence, and systemic failures can create conditions where violence escalates unchecked. The victims of these crimes deserve to be remembered not just as statistics or names in news reports, but as human beings whose lives had value and meaning. Their stories should inspire us to build safer communities and more effective systems for identifying and intervening with potentially violent individuals before tragedy strikes. As we conclude this examination of one of Alabama's most disturbing criminal cases, we honor the victims by learning from what happened and by committing to the difficult work of preventing such devastation in the future.